I will never, ever forget the 4 divine appointments that happened on Easter Sunday 2009. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 4 and 5 say, "And my message and my preaching were very plain. Rather than relying on clever and persuasive speech, I only relied on the power of the Holy Spirit. I did this so that you would not trust in human wisdom, but in the power of God." I'll never forget the events that unfolded on Easter Sunday 2009. That morning, I had noticed that a cold front had blown in the night before. It was extremely cold, and it was also raining buckets of rain. As I drove to church, I noticed I passed a man that was carrying his belongings that didn't have any rain gear. So I positioned my car ahead of him, and I was going to invite him to church. And as I rolled down my window to say something, the man just looked at me, and his face changed into this demonic figure. And not only that, but he hissed at me. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and arms. I mean, I was in literally shock at what I saw in that man's face. So I sat there and did the only thing that made sense, which was pray, "Lord, why are you showing me this? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to go and deliver that man? Are you going to give me the grace that I need to be able to help him in some way?" And as I sat there, startled and prayed, the Lord was silent. He didn't say anything. I kept praying, "Lord, what do you want me to do? Why have you allowed me to see this situation?" But still, the Lord hadn't given me the grace I needed to turn around and do something. So I drove to church instead, the whole rest of the way while I was driving to Dayspring. I was startled and also confused about what had just happened. And I kept praying, "Lord, why would you allow me to see something like that without giving me the grace I needed to do something to help that man?" Well, the Lord was silent the whole way. During church service, there was a wonderful sermon on Easter Sunday about the resurrection power of Christ, but I was still startled by what happened on the way there. I drove home a different route, which I normally took, and on the way home, I passed this guy that was standing on the corner that didn't have any rain gear, that was getting soaking wet because it was still raining buckets of water. I looked to see if he would motion me to give him any help. I had prayed to the Lord earlier as I was driving to church after the first encounter, "Lord, if you want me to do something, you've got to let your will be known. Tell me, help me understand that you want me to do something." But the Lord didn't answer me this time either. I sat there and prayed again, "Lord, do you want me to help this man? He's standing in the rain. He doesn't have any rain gear." But the Lord was silent. So I just drove back home to where I was staying at the Franciscan Villa Apartments. And then I went down into the basement to where I used to get the buffet food, which was being served. And I still was praying, "Lord, if you want me to do something, if you want me to give somebody a ride, if you want me to minister to someone needs, then just tell me what to do. If you make it easy for me to understand your will, I'll do your will." Well, I sat down with my food and I was just getting ready to eat, and the Lord called my bluff. That man that I just passed moments earlier, who did not live at the Franciscan Villa Apartments, suddenly appeared down in the basement where the buffet was served. First time I've ever seen that man there before. Usually the only people that eat there are the people that were the residents of the 100-unit Franciscan Villa Apartments. But that man came in, and he walked right over to my table, and he said to the guy next to me, he said, "I need a ride. I didn't go home last night." And he says, "I need a ride home. Can you give me a ride home?" Well, this time the Lord called my bluff, and I knew that this was a divine appointment. And I just right away said, "I'll give you a ride home." He said, "You will?" And I said, "Yeah." And said, "Just let me finish eating and I'll be happy to take you." And so as I drove him home, I found out that man had cheated on his wife, that he didn't go home the night before, that he had a drinking and a drug problem. And because God delivered me from alcohol and drugs, I was in the perfect position to be able to minister to his needs. And not only that, I was able to give him some counseling about his wife and about recommitting his life to the Lord. He was lost. He was confused. He was a prodigal son. And so I was able to minister all those needs. And before he got out of the car, he recommitted his life to the Lord. And he also promised that he would get help and counseling with his wife. As I was driving back to where I lived, this time I was kind of gloating, and I said, Lord, see, if you just make your will known, it will work out better for you and it will work out better for me. And I'll be happy to carry out your will as long as you make your will known. And I was kind of gloating here with the Lord and teasing him that way. Well, right when I was getting ready to pull into the Franciscan Villa Apartments, this woman all of a sudden jumped in front of my van and she flagged me down. Next thing I know, she opened the door, the passenger side, and she's sitting next to me. Only this time, it was a prostitute. She said, thanks for stopping. It's raining really hard. And then she tried to pick me up. While she was trying to pick me up, I heard the Lord say, this is a prostitute, and I want you to minister to her needs. And so I let the lady know that I was not interested at all at picking her up, and that I would be happy to give her a ride to wherever she needed to go to get out of the rain. And when we got to her sister's house, I prayed with her and prayed that the things that I felt God wanted me to share, the love of Christ and the gospel message. It was a beautiful encounter. Before she left, she was weeping and crying and thanked me for my time. After I dropped her off at her sister's house, I drove back to where I lived. This time I barely made it to work in time to start my shift as a night security guard. And when I checked into the front desk there, which is where I sat during my shift, all of a sudden Richard Schultz came up to me. And he said to me, he says, you know, I've been thinking about some of the things you've been sharing with me over these last few months. And he said, I'm ready to give my life to Jesus Christ and ask him to come into my life and be Lord of my life. Richard and I went over to a small private room, and we got down on our hands and knees, and he asked Christ into his life. And not only that, but a couple days later, we baptized him at Day Spring Church. Both were beautiful encounters that I shared with Richard while we both lived at the Franciscan Villa Apartments. Later on, when we both moved, we stayed in touch on Facebook, and to this day, we're still great friends. But soon after he got baptized, we were talking one day, and he told me this story. He says, you know, I was walking to the convenience store, and I came across this guy it must be demonic, because the guy was hissing at me. He said, and he had this weird kind of look in his face. He says, I'm not sure if that was a demon or something else. Well, those 4 appointments that happened on Easter Sunday, I'll always cherish. Especially the memory now that I share with Richard Schultz, who's a Facebook friend of mine and is now happily married and has children.